Hey everyone, today I wanted to do a brief walkthrough of Destiny's final artifact sandbox. Now, normally this is a bit of a special video because I don't account for artifact mods when it comes to damage testing outside of day ones, as well as for tier listing, and today that changes because I have to, because this is Destiny's final artifact sandbox. In theory, these artifacts are never going to change, and they're going to apply to all of our damage metas and testing going forward. And so this video is half for you and half for me. I'm sure you guys have experimented a lot with artifacts already, so, I'm probably going to tell you some things that you already know. But in case you're interested in the specific numbers when it comes to artifact mods and testing, as well as individual placements of individual artifact mods, because I'm not going to go over every single one in this video, that would take way too long, I'm going to leave a link in the description to the artifact mods tab of the endgame analysis spreadsheet, where you can see the specific numbers that me and others in the community like Destiny Data Compendium have found when it comes to these artifact mods and their interactions. So if you're curious about that, link in the description. Now for the rest, this is going to be a little interesting because maybe normally auto rifle, SMG, different archetypes, weapon families, they have certain damage numbers. And normally we just measure them and we tier list them based on that. However, this season we'll call it, certain artifact mods might boost auto rifles or SMGs or machine guns or who knows. And they might make certain weapon types stronger than others. And so we're going to talk about how the artifacts are shaping the meta, if that is the case, if they're making stronger options even more dominant, or if they're making weaker options potentially contend with stronger options. We're going to talk about that in this video. So if you're interested in that, stick around. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to get right into it. We're going to start with the encrypted data disk. So for every single artifact, I'm going to have some bolded text going over the concepts in the artifact that I think are very strongly supported and potentially meta, as well as some other concepts that are maybe a bit weaker that are reinforced by the artifact, but are not necessarily meta defining even with the artifact mod support that they have. So an example here is bolded in the text here. You see A499 DPS, specifically because of Sniper's Meditation, Kinetic Synthesis, Reload at Range, and you'll notice I say Kinetic Rupture specifically with Izzy. So why is Izanagi's Burden good with Kinetic Rupture? For those of you that don't know, Kinetic Rupture used to be a very strong mod where anything that you shot it with that does like crit damage would double in damage. So this would work with Nighthawk, this would work with Still Hunt, this would work with A499. And so it was a good mod to run because it would just increase your damage when it comes to precision stuff. However, this was nerfed, and now for a lot of weapons, the vast majority of weapons actually, when you shoot the Rupture, you do less damage, especially for DPS weapons. The only exception is Izzy. So in theory, if you were not running Still Hunt, you could run Izzy, A499, and every time your A499 would produce a Rupture or one of your teammates made one, you would swap to Izzy and just shoot it, and you would get a nice spike in DPS. So that's why I wanted to mention that mod. Now we also have Jolt Spam Neutral as a major concept that's reinforced by this artifact, and that's specifically because of mods like Blinding Jolts especially and Dielectric. Now, Blinding Jolts is a particularly strong neutral mod because any sort of Jolt spam build is able to keep an area or like a group of enemies repeatedly blinded with no internal cooldown. And so if you're using a weapon with Jolt or some sort of spam jolting build like Tempest Strike with Lethal Current or something like that, it's pretty good. You can also make use of Taser Tag. Now, I will note here that there are some artifact concepts that are supported like technically by one or two artifact mods that are maybe not that strong. If you're curious about specific mods and my thoughts on them, they will be in the tier list that I'm linking in the description. But just note that anything that supports a concept, I will include it. So for example, let's say there's like Stasis Neutral, or in this case, Jolt Spam Neutral. Taser Tag is not that strong of a mod because it applies Jolt on melees. A lot of good melee builds already apply Jolt on melee, and it applies a damage over time effect that lasts 9 seconds. Most of the time when you're killing something with a melee in D2, you're definitely killing it faster than 9 seconds. And so the DOT is not that helpful. Now, even though this mod is not that great, it is, in theory, supporting this idea of Jolt spam arc-related neutral stuff. And so I will include it. It's not necessarily like a strong endorsement of the usage of that mod or anything like that. But I will say the reason why Jolt spam neutral is bolded here is just because I think Blinding Jolts is a very, very excellent mod. Unfortunately, it's not as strong on builds that rely on stuff like Facet of Dominance or Spark of Shock. So I'm looking at, Shinobus. I'm looking at, for example, Getaway Artist. Facet of Dominance, we talked about this. The nerf didn't really impact these builds that much in terms of their raw killing power. But for specifically Blinding Jolts, where you want to jolt targets over and over and over very quickly, you can run into that cooldown and it's not as effective compared to if you just use like a Volt Shot weapon. It's very, very noticeable when you're using a mod like Blinding Jolt. So that's just some information for you. Next, we have Void / Handheld Supernova Neutral here. Nothing too crazy or special here. There's other better Void artifacts. I just wanted to mention Handheld Supernova because Sticker Shock, which is supposed to work with magnetic grenades, if you have it equipped with Handheld Supernova, you don't get the damage boost, but the Handheld Supernova does summon the 4 kinetic like ancillary ordnance missiles. So if you're curious and you want to make a build with that, The missiles are not that bad, honestly. They do a decent amount of damage, decent amount of stagger. So, an interesting effect there. And then finally, sword DPS. So a prime example of something not being bolded despite it being like a strong concept in an artifact is here, because combination Argent Blade and Sword Storm combo combined do make for the strongest sword artifact. There's a couple other artifacts here that have sword related stuff, but this is easily the strongest one for DPS, and yet I haven't bolded sword DPS because just base sword DPS in this game right now is not high enough to contend with the top meta picks, even with these artifacts reinforcing them. So because of that, it's not bolded. A499 DPS, I can easily see it being the best option for certain things or certain scenarios. Jolt spam neutral, blinding jolts, and a Vulture weapon. I think that's also an excellent pick, but sword DPS, I just don't really see a reason to use it, given the plethora of options that we have in the sandbox for both melee and ranged that are just higher DPS and higher total. All right. Next up, we have the Hunter's Journal. This artifact is a little bit disappointing. I mentioned Solar Fulmination here, and I bold Solar Neutral because Solar Fulmination is just a very, very strong artifact mod, especially given that a lot of Solar builds are lacking a little support in these artifacts compared to Void, compared to Arc, compared to Strand, compared to Stasis. I do think Solar kind of has the worst time here. So that is something that I wanted to point out. And even in this artifact, there's not a lot of support for solar stuff. There's like a lot of neutral stuff. Like Shield Crush will certainly help a neutral solar build, so will Radiant Orbs and Elemental Siphon, but none of them are like really solar specific and very, very potent for specifically solar. So a bit of a shame, but Solar Fulmination is a very strong mod, so I did want to mention it. And then we have some sword neutral stuff. Like I mentioned, Argent Blade, Blade Stamina, a little bit worse for sword DPS than the previous artifact that we talked about, but still not enough. Same kind of concept here. Prismatic neutral, general tools. I bold Radiant Orbs here because it is a nice effect to have in like more optimized environments like speedruns or solos or certain challenges. But outside of that, not super crazy. And then auto neutral, I haven't bolded here. These two mods are very good, but I do think there is another artifact that is significantly better for auto neutral. And so I haven't bolded it because I think if you're going to abuse auto rifles in PvE, there's probably another artifact that you want to check out. So Hunter's Journal, not that impressive. Next up, we have the Implement of Curiosity. This one does have quite a few bolded options here. First is Levy, and I should have included Crossbow DPS as well to some extent. Argent Quiver, Semi-Auto Striker, Shoulder to Shoulder. Crossbow a little bit weaker with Argent Quiver because you either need a crazy armor charge source or you need to not swap, because Argent Quiver eats armor charges and removes its buff every single time you swap weapons. And of course, if you are doing a fast swap rotation with a crossbow, you are eating 10 armor charge every time you want to use 10 bolts, right? Which is a lot. Threadling neutral or just Strand neutral in general, just excellent mods here like Horde Shuttle, Pack Tactics. Cauterized Darkness, I want to point out, is a very, very strong mod, and I don't think people have really been talking about it that much. Obviously, people are very, enthralled with Vex Mythoclast being buffed, and, there's like, oh, it's up to a 27% scaling debuff that you can apply on any target, which is really nice. Cauterized Darkness, for those that don't know, against non-boss combatants that are Darkness debuffed, your solar weapons do 75% more damage. It stacks with everything. 75% is insane. It's not like solar weapons are bad either, right? You have Return Memory, you have Motif, you have a couple other options that are not amazing. Or you have Valantive too. They added Valantive this season. That's amazing, right? So like, as long as you're running something that unravels or severs or freezes or slows or whatever it is on your build, if you're running Strand or Stasis, I really think Cauterized Darkness is so insane. It's so insane actually that there is another artifact, the Slayer Baron Apothecary Satchel, which we'll talk about in a second, that has arguably better stasis neutral than this artifact, and yet I'm still going to recommend that even if you're running stasis, you may want to look at Implement of Curiosity just because of Cauterized Darkness. Cauterized Darkness is so strong. I think it is one of the most underrated artifact mods, and maybe people haven't really been talking about it as much as they should be, because people go crazy for Vex. That's 27%. And this is 75. 75 is insane. That is an insane number to just have on a damage buff. That is, there are some conditions you have to meet. Solar weapon, you have to, Darkness debuff, but it's a lot. It's a lot, right? Sword neutral, kind of whatever. General tools, I will say Energy Acceleration with like the whole Strand thing here. If you have like a Hatchling mint or you're running some sort of Threadling build, Energy Acceleration can just help mint just be a little bit more potent. Any sort of Rocket Pulse or Rocket Sidearm obviously appreciates Energy Acceleration regardless. And then you have a couple other, artifact mods here that are just general tools. Not going to mention it too much, but yeah, Implement of Curiosity, Bow DPS, Threadling neutral, Darkness neutral, Cauterized Darkness, good stuff. Next, we have the NPA Repulsion Regulator. This one is good for a super swap if you are on Arc. So Thunderous Retort is 30% compared to Limit Break being 15. Heart of the Flame also only scales to 15 post nerf. So yeah, 30% if you're on Thunder Crash, mostly just on Thunder Crash. The artifact stacking thing made people use Chaos Reach and stuff like that, but in a lot of endgame meta content, you're generally going to just be sticking to Thunder Crash if you're going to be using an Arc Super, because on Hunter you have Goldie, on Warlock you're either on Well or maybe you're on Needle Storm, so not as strong. Conductive Cosmic Needle, I do mention it here, but it's only 5%. Not a lot, not super noticeable, but it does affect boss targets. So unlike stuff like Torch, it is useful in those contexts. And then I want to point out a very strong outlier here, and that's Void Autos. Void Autos. Normally, artifacts are like, okay, maybe you want to pick specifically this primary archetype. You want to pick sidearms, or you want to pick specifically void weapons. This artifact is so heavily skewed towards specifically void autos. And there is one void auto that sits above the rest, and it's not a primary, it's Choir. It's Choir. This is the Choir artifact. This artifact makes Choir insane. You can be on void, you can be off void. It doesn't really matter. Obviously, on void, it's a little bit better, but all of these artifacts, you can literally have 7 artifact mods. There's probably like 8 or 9 artifact mods, to be honest, in this artifact that assist with Choir in neutral content. But you can have literally a full row of artifact mods that all buff Choir in some way. Of course, Repulsor Destabilizing or even like Dimensional Shift Void Autos that are just primaries are also insanely buffed by this as well. And you can argue that in certain content like Sustained Fire, Targeting Autoloader, some of them have requirements where you need to hit the same target a bunch of times. And so Choir in a lot of content is just not going to be able to meet those requirements because a single target's just going to die before you can shoot it 10 times. So yeah, there's some argument to be had there, but still, Void Auto Neutral is insanely buffed. And when it comes to the tier list, auto rifles are probably going to place higher in the hierarchy when it comes to archetypes than other weapon types compared to before, like SMGs and whatnot. Autos were already pretty good, to be fair, especially for their range. And now they're going to be probably placed even higher because they have Targeting Autoloader and Sustained Fire. No other weapon type, besides like really bows kind of, has the same level of support that auto rifles do. They have essentially doubled effect enhanced subsistence, and they have a free damage buff, which is crazy, right? On top of all the other support that they're already receiving if they are void. Glaive Neutral, I want to mention Suppressing Glaive is low-key a very strong artifact. A lot of people are a very strong artifact mod. A lot of people complain about Banes and 5 feet and stuff like that. A lot of aggressive Bane types, for those that don't know, their effects just turn off when you suppress them. And so Suppressing Glaive instantly suppresses enemies on no internal cooldown, as many enemies as you want if you hit them with a Glaive projectile or a Glaive melee, which is really great. That's really great. And Glaives are obviously an underrated defensive tool in endgame content as well. So if you're struggling with Banes, try out Suppressing Glaive. Normally, Void Suppress is like a very annoying effect to come by. You got Tractor, you have like Suppressor Nade, not the greatest options. A little bit restrictive when it comes to loadouts. This, all you need to do, any Glaive, you just shoot a Bane and it will turn off. It will literally turn off its effect most of the time. Like, it's really funny. You can go to a promoted Bane, you can shoot it with Suppressing Glaive, and it just turns into a regular ad. It's really funny. So there's that. Passive Aggressive Guard obviously helps as well. I believe it's 25% stackable DR. It's not a generic type. You have Shinobu / Getaway with LST and Shock and Awe, which are just uptime artifact mods. And then Shadow Orbs. Shadow Orbs apparently can be bypassed. Its effect works with finishers as well as just working with non-matching shield breaks. So make use of that with what you will. Technically, Curative Orbs is a better artifact mod because of the healing effect. But if you want to use this specific artifact mod and spam finishers using Shadow Orbs, it's also an option. Next, we have the Queensfoil Censer. This one has a couple options. You have Rocket DPS, so if you're doing like Hezen Spam or Truth, Argent Ordnance is your best friend. If you're doing some sort of solo and you're staying alive, fairly long, solo DPS, solo operative is good if you can get a lot of crit kills. No other solo mod really allows you to increase your damage by this much, and you have Argent Access that stacks on top as well. You have some Strand neutral stuff, but I think it's obviously going to be worse than Implement. You have some Stasis neutral stuff, but it's going to be worse than Slayer Baron. Solar neutral, a lot of people who are running Warlock, or they're running like Solar Hunter or something like that, they are opting to use this artifact mod because Razor Precision is pretty good, Kindling Trigger is okay, and it's just, Razor Precision is pretty strong, but there's just not a lot of mods in this, even in this artifact mod, the one people are using for Solar specifically, that synergize well together compared to if we go to Implement and Strand, or if we go to Slayer and Stasis. There are like 5 or 6 very impactful mods that all work together, whereas Solar neutral, it's kind of just Razor Precision, so it's not the greatest. I think Solar builds definitely got the short end of the stick here when it comes to having artifact support. Literally every other element, I would say, Arc, Void, Strand, Stasis, got a lot more support in these artifacts, but it is what it is. Rocket GL neutral, I think Blast Radius is just really good in general because a lot of people are running GLs or maybe sometimes Galley, and getting armor charge just for killing stuff with a popular weapon archetype is pretty nice. So I just decided to bold it. You have some other, Rocket GL neutral stuff in case you want to run like bipod rockets in a Conquest or something. That's an option with Galley. And then Wished into Being, I do want to mention, if you are at 80% or above super, so like approximately 1 bar left, and you kill something with an ability, it makes 3 big orbs, like big orbs that are big enough that when you pick them up, you just get your full super. So at base, this is essentially like a 25% increase to your super gen rate, which is already decent. But when you consider that you can do it in like a team play setting and chain supers with people over like a longer activity, I think this is actually a pretty good mod. And so I decided to bold it. The rest of the stuff is kind of whatever. Also, small side note, Armorsmith actually does proc on Finisher because it counts as breaking a shield, as I'm sure you may have discovered because of the Curative Orb, Shatter Orbs interaction that people have been talking about recently. And next we have the Slayer Baron Apothecary Satchel. Some people have been asking me if the Exterus Bittersweet rotation is going to return because of this artifact. The answer is no. If there were stronger arc, not really, I don't know. If there were stronger arc weapons, you might see someone using, arc compounding plus retinal burn. But unfortunately, a lot of the weapons in our sandbox right now that are really good are not, they tend to be solar and void, and they're not necessarily arc. Even if, Hothead was meta or something like that, you would just use Argent Ordnance because arc compounding is just a 15% increase. And it is stackable, but like, there are other mods that don't require you to blind a target, especially a boss level target, and they have the same bonus. So if arc compounding was like 30%, I could see maybe people wanting to use it for something, but it's only 15. And so there's a lot of meta stuff that's already meta, like Hezen, Truth, and Argent Quiver, bows, and those don't have any like special requirements. So this is not really a meta artifact. And yes, heavy jails, just to say it explicitly here, they are not receiving enough support from this artifact, and they're also just not good enough to really compete regardless, even if they had a 15% boost that was easier to access. Stasis Neutral, I've heard that this is an excellent artifact for that. Curative Orbs also gives you healing off of Stasis Shard pickup, which makes it very, very good with this artifact as well. You can sub it into like a Stasis row. You have some decent Void Neutral stuff, but I'd probably take NPA over this for that, and I think most other people would as well. And then you have some general tools, think of it for Armor Charge, Total Carnage is kind of cool. You get a lot of healing off of Finishers, and then, Debilitating Wave also synergizes with Finishers as well. And then, finally, I believe this is the last one, we have Tablet of Ruin. This one's got quite a few options that are maybe a little bit underrated. You have Super Swap with Limit Break. So if you want to pop your Super and swap to a different damage loadout, maybe like swap off of Curious on Titan to something else, or swap off of Night Hack on Hunter to something else, you would run, Limit Break, and then you would swap to maybe, some sort of other artifact that boosts your sniper damage or something like that. So that's an option here. This is like the default if you're not on Arc. And then you have Solo Fusion / Linear DPS with Particle Reconstruction. Specifically, when you're solo, it can be hard to have a debuff if you're not like Fountain extending or something. So having access to like a 27% debuff does help the case of fusions and linears a lot, because they are normally a slightly underperforming archetype compared to some of the other stuff in the sandbox. But for solo, them being able to just debuff on their own is obviously very helpful. You have some Void Neutral stuff, not particularly amazing. Bolt Charge DPS stuff. Flashover, of course, only applies to the person who has the artifact mod on, so you can't like share this effect with the rest of your teams. So unless you're solo and already using Particle and maybe you have like a Bolt Charge Barricade or something, I don't really see why you would take this for like the majority of content. We have LMG Neutral and Glaive Neutral. Heavy Ordnance Regeneration is excellent with LMGs, and Hold the Line is also excellent. There is another artifact mod, I'm not sure what it's called, that also heals you on LMG kills, but it's like 3 kills within 3 seconds of each. Hold the Line is way, way, way higher uptime for better health gains. So Hold the Line is really, really strong with LMGs. It gives you almost like super nerfed Devour, which is like a crazy effect to have because you can also stack it on top of other healing effects. You have No Bell on Glaives, which is nerfed to be additive. It's plus 85% now, which is not amazing, but you still get the special ammo refund. There's some arc neutral stuff, some strand neutral stuff. So basically this artifact, favors solo fusion DPS. You can do super swapping. And then I would say you can run like a Void LMG, a Strand LMG, and it would do really well with this artifact. You also have some cool general tools like Elemental Supercharger, which is currently very, very strong. It gives you additional super energy progress every time you kill an exhausted target. And all overload weapons in this game exhaust on hit now. So you can literally just run like a third of the sandbox as a weapon and just kill stuff and you get way more super. It also stacks with effects like Dealer's Choice, which allows for some pretty insane super generation strategies. And then you have Elemental Siphon. The reason why I highlight this version in particular is there's another Elemental Siphon on a different artifact. I think it's on Hunter's Journal maybe. And that one doesn't give you more super when you pick up matching pickups, whereas Elemental Siphon on this version does. And so this one is quite a bit better. You have Gold from Lead, which I'm sure you know this, but you pick up 5 or 6 special bricks, you get a free sort of heavy brick equivalent. So that's obviously very strong. And then Harsh Refraction I wanted to mention because you could in theory also use like a trait, like a Strand Trace or something with this artifact, and it would be pretty good. It would boost these Strand Traces DPS by a significant amount and make it feel probably a lot better. That's Tablet of Ruin. And now we're going to go over some overall outliers to end the video. So overall, the summary is as follows. Artifact 1, Encrypted Data Disk. This is for Izzy, Stillhunt, A499 DPS. And if you're going to be on this artifact just in general, I think Jolt Spam Neutral, just running like a Volt Shot, maybe like Indebted Kindness or something is pretty good on this artifact. Hunter's Journal I see the least use out of, to be honest. Basically just ignition builds. I think for everything else you would run a different artifact. Implement of Curiosity, use it for Levy and Crossbow DPS, as well as if you're running a Darkness subclass and you want to abuse Cauterized, obviously the artifact you want to take. NPA Repulsion is the Choir Abuse / Void Auto Abuse. You have Arc Super Damage in case you're on T-Crash, and it's also very good for Glaive defensive stuff. Queensfoil Censer is for Rocket DPS, Hezen, Truth, etc., and as well as Solo DPS because of Solo Operative. I just realized, but Solo Operative existing probably discourages the use of Tablet of Ruin as well, but yeah, that's the thing. Slayer Baron Apothecary Satchel I think is really only useful for Stasis Neutral as well as Curative Orbs access. And even on Stasis Neutral, like I mentioned, there's an argument for just running Implement if you want to abuse the Solar Weapon interaction with Cauterize, so that's kind of up to you. And then finally, Tablet of Ruin for General Super Swap access to Limit Break, Fusion LFR DPS, or using Vex as a neutral weapon. And then finally, Strand, Void, LMG, Trace, Glaive Neutral, which is the other legendary archetype besides Void Auto from NPA that I would say is quite favored by the set of artifacts that we have access to. And then finally, some shoutouts on the right side here that I want to make. For ammo, Shatter Orbs, Curative Orbs, and Trace Evidence. For those of you who are not aware, these combined with the Veritas set or the Pantheon 2-piece, they enable you to infinitely special finish your ads because Shatter Orbs and Curative Orbs, for whatever reason in this game, there is an interaction that we've known about for a long time, but is particularly important here, where if you finisher an enemy, it counts as breaking an elemental shield. And so for Shadow Orbs and Curative Orbs, it means every time you finish or something, it'll make an orb, and with stacks on stacks and the Pantheon 2-piece, you can just instantly get 3 armor charge back, and then you can finisher another enemy. So over and over, you can just spam special finishers. And then Trace Evidence, if you finisher something with Veritas, you can make a Trace, and that will give you armor charge from Trace Evidence's secondary effect, and you can kind of spam finishers like that as well. And then finally, Gold from Lead and Bricks from Beyond are just general ammo progression increases. And then finally, Super Generation Outliers. Elemental Supercharger is super, super good. You can literally run like an Area Denial, which is Overload, I believe, at this current state. And you can just Area Denial a bunch of ads, and they just give you a crap load of super because of Elemental Supercharger, because all of them are exhausted. And then you have Elemental Siphon, which is a little bit, I guess, less impactful than Supercharger. Supercharger is super noticeable. Siphon, if you're able to spam pickups, like for example, if you're on Stasis, you can pick up the shards one by one slowly because it has like a bit of a cooldown on the super gains, and you can obviously farm super very quickly, but it depends on your build and how quickly it's able to spit out these elemental pickups. So that's about it. That's all I have to talk about this video. Most of you probably already know most of this stuff, but I wanted to point out some of the cool stuff like Cauterized and discuss how Void Auto specifically and some LMG Trace Glaive stuff on Tablet of Ruin is reinforced this season on some already pretty good artifacts, to be honest. Like Tablet of Ruin and NPA are decent for neutral regardless of what you use. So they're definitely favored, and that's definitely going to be taken into account when we make tier lists. And obviously the mods like Argent stuff, those are going to be accounted for when we do DPS testing as well. So that's about it. Hopefully this video wasn't too long. I'll chop it up to make it a little shorter. And I'll see you guys in the next one. We're going to be doing base value testing and archetype testing. And we're going to be tier listing archetypes, tier listing primaries, tier listing specials, and lots of stuff left to come. So see you guys then.